Do you want some ideas for masculine cards and some templates that leave no scraps? I've got you covered. Hi, I'm Jess from jesscrafts.com, and I'm going to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get started. Today I am working with a paper pad from Paper Rose. It is a 6x6 paper pad called Dad's Shed. This is an Australian company, but the papers are also available here in the US. I do like to try to mix it up and use papers manufactured in different parts of the world just so that if you have trouble getting paper made from American companies, I have some alternate videos for you as well. So this is paper pad template number 1, which was quite ambitious because I named it that, like I was going to make more paper pad templates, and it kind of hasn't happened yet. I've done a lot of 6x6 like one sheet wonders or no scrap templates where I take one sheet of 6x6 paper and I make usually 2 of the same design and sometimes more, but it's always of the same design when I do those no scrap templates. This one, you're cutting one piece of 6x6 paper and you might be getting 2 different designs, but because you're trying to use up a whole paper pad, eventually you should be able to get through them all. Also, it calls for these 1.5 by 2 inch cut aparts, which you see I'm cutting apart right now. Not every paper collection has these. Of course, you could cut them from any paper collection and you can embellish them because it is a 6x6 sheet of paper perfectly cuts into those sizes. But I recommend this for collections that have that. Doodlebug has had it, Authentique and Paper Rose now I know of, but there's other ones out there too, other companies that make those little cut aparts. They are kind of small for a focal point, but I've designed the sketches with that scale in mind. So if you have any paper pads with these little tiny cut aparts, I think that you will enjoy trying to use them up with these templates. The Dad's Shed collection has 3 of each sheet of paper. So each of those cut aparts, there's 3 of them. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at each paper and think which templates from my 6x6 paper pad template, because there are 5 different sketches. So there's 5 different designs. And so I think, okay, well, which paper do I think goes well with these designs? And I'm going to pair it up with that printed off PDF. And I'm going to take the printed PDF, the papers that I've picked, and the cut aparts that I think will also go well with the paper that I chose. And I'm going to put it all together in a poly envelope, so like a flexible plastic envelope that has a Velcro closure. I use these all the time, so you've probably seen them a million times on my channel before, but trying to just keep all the little pieces and parts together helps keep me organized when I'm trying to use up an entire paper pad in one go. So I am considering that some of these templates will ask you to cut a piece and then you'll have to turn it on its side. So sometimes if your paper is directional, which means there's a clear top and bottom, it can only go in one direction, and if you turn it on its side, it doesn't look good. It won't be a good idea to use it with some of these templates. And then other templates, it's fine. You can use a directional pattern paper. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind as you're picking your papers as well. Something that I noticed about this collection is some of the papers, the front and the back, I didn't necessarily like the way they went together. I thought that while overall the collection's pretty cohesive, there are some papers that have a lot more black, and there's some papers that have a lot more of the navy, and I'm just personally not a big fan of the way navy and black work together. So I found some of them a little bit challenging to think about using both sides of the pattern paper on one card. That's not always going to be true for different pattern papers, and you could potentially just mix them up instead of using the back and the front, you could cut 2 different sheets of paper with the template and then like swap them back and forth. But it's just something to keep in mind because some of these templates are suggesting that you use both sides of the same paper in order to complete the card, but not all of them. So just want to give you a heads up on that if you're having the same issue where whatever paper pad you're working with, you don't love both sides together. There was also pattern paper in this collection that has like some strips across it, and then there's this one that has all the tools. I think that could work for many things, but the tool paper is definitely not my favorite, in part because I don't like that the tools don't come all the way off the side. They're all sort of centered on the paper with a border around them. So it can look a little bit awkward versus like a continuous pattern. You'll see there's another paper in the collection that has tools, and they're much smaller, and the paper, it's right there in my hand right now, and it goes right off the paper. So it's a really continuous pattern. And I think that works a little bit better when you're cutting things up into small bits. So that'll come up later in the video. We'll talk a little bit more about it. But just a heads up on some of my setup process, what I am thinking about as I'm trying to decide all of this. And once I've made those decisions, now it's just very much like a procedure to finish everything. I'm just going to start chopping according to the templates. The templates are going to tell me exactly how to cut each piece of paper and exactly how to assemble them into an aesthetically pleasing card. So this first template, you cut one piece of paper and it gives you two different cards. This is one where you do want a non-directional pattern. So you don't want a pattern paper that has a clear top and bottom. You want it to be able to fit either way because you're going to turn them onto their side. And then I decide, I like this one in particular, to me was like one of the easiest pattern papers because I like the two sides together so I can easily combine them. For the mats are, for most of these, I only call, or actually I think for all of these, I only call for mats on the 1.5 by 2 inch little elements, just to make them a little bit bigger, more substantial, and stand off, or kind of stand out a little bit from their background papers. And then I don't call for mats on everything else. You could, of course, add mats if that's what you like. I usually use 1/4 inch mats. You use what works for you. I chose black for most of the mats, but you'll see later on I do use navy for some of them, again, because this pattern paper has a lot of black, but also uses navy as a neutral. And so I'm kind of trying to compromise those two things. If you wanted to stick with just one, a gray would probably work well with everything. I call for some corner rounding. I don't usually do that in my One Sheet Wonder no scrap templates. I like the look of corner rounding, but I think the corner rounding particularly works well when you're not using a mat because it gives a little bit more of, gives a little more definition to the edge of your pieces. So if you're not going to do a mat, if you don't like doing mats in general, you find that it takes extra materials, extra time, and you're using one of my other no scrap templates, then you can just skip the mat and do a little bit of corner rounding instead, and I think it gives it a nice finished edge. I'm going to kind of mix and match and choose how I want to use these pattern papers. I will make them all the same, but I think what's nice is I could actually make them a little bit different. So there are 3 pieces of this pattern paper, so I'm going to make 3 of each of these cards. In the original sketch, call for this smaller piece to be at the top and the larger piece to be at the bottom. And I call for the 3x4 the 1.5 by 2 inch cut apart to be in the top center. But I kind of flip things around just a tiny bit, and I put the bottom strip to be the small one, and then I put the cut apart a little off to the side. In general, while I am trying to show you how to do things really simply and giving you a sketch, please feel free always to mix it up to however you like and suits you, because those little changes make it your own, and you're of course welcome to copy exactly. That's why I give these, that's why I have these on my website, but it can be fun to add your own interest. Now, this second sketch, it calls for the corners to be rounded again. I decided against that in this instance because I thought the paper actually looks really nice without that too, because these are more masculine cards. I think that the more hard corners, or leaving the point there, actually looks a little bit more appropriate for a masculine card. Now, to be clear, I don't think any one pattern paper, stamp, or whatever is only for men or only for women, or I think so many things in your gender, it does not matter. I just know that I've had people ask for card ideas for masculine cards or card ideas for people who do not like the more common craft, like color palettes and designs and motifs and all that. So obviously we all have women or non-binary people in our life who like to work with tools and are expert builders, or, so I don't think these cards are only for men. I'm just sharing this as a response to that general inquiry. I'm working on the second template in the collection. This particular one makes a lot of cards. So you cut one piece of paper and it makes 3 cards, and they're all the same. You're just lining up these strips. You can choose to round the corners of the top and the bottom one if you want, and you can choose to mix up the strips. So a lot of times I will use just the same pattern all the way down. But in this instance, when I cut this one up, the backside had little like tools in the corner, and then they're kind of chopped apart, and that doesn't quite look right. But a lot of the paper also didn't have the tools, because the tools, like I said, they were only in the bottom corner of the paper. So I was able to pull some of them out as the background, or as the back of the paper, the B side, which was this sort of wooden color with the tools in the corner, or the wooden background with the tools in the corner. And then I was able to use the other side, which has those like little hash patterns in it. And so if you look at the result on the blog post, you'll see that I've mixed it up like that. And so if you think like, sometimes you'll get a pattern paper and you're like, ugh, this backside is just not going to work at all because it has this like really weird large motif in the corner or something like that. Sometimes it still can. It's just depending on what you are pairing with it. And I always just kind of encourage people to stay open to how you can use it, because you can be pretty flexible with these things. Next up, some of the cut-aparts had just sentiments like all over it. And I did not want to use them that way, because it says like, happy birthday, thanks, cheers, and oh yeah. And I'm like, that's not, like, I wouldn't put all of those sentiments on the same card personally. Maybe there's an instance where that makes sense, but I'm going to instead cut them apart and use some of the sentiments to embellish the cut-aparts that don't have sentiments, so that it does look like a complete card. And then I will save the sentiments that I cut off and try to use them later. Ultimately, this paper pad does wind up having some scraps. You can follow this tutorial and have no scraps at the end, and I even suggest a separate sketch for what to do if you have like extra cut-aparts. But because I had the unique situation of some of these cut-aparts being sentiments only and cutting them up, ultimately I think there was a few little strips of paper that I didn't use. So just a heads up that while I'm going to say this is a no scrap paper template, technically not true in this instance. In regards to cutting template B, sorry, I was numbering them and they're lettered. It'll all make sense. That's the thing. This is a PDF. So you do not have to pay attention to the measurements that I'm saying. I am in this video mostly just sharing thought processes, ideas, design decisions, that kind of thing. But in terms of like knowing how to cut everything, that's a PDF. You can see that I've printed it for myself, but you go over to jesscrafts.com and you can download it. For this one, which is cutting template C, originally, it doesn't call for a mat behind this large centerpiece, but I decided to use it just because this particular pattern paper, the one with the tools all over it, it being a white background on a white card, I didn't feel like it stood out. So I added the mat. You can instead use a colored cardstock, and then the white paper would stand out. But just as a thought there, like why I chose to do that. Now I'm moving on to template D, and this makes 2 different cards. This one, I decided to change it up. When I cut the circles out of the center, so it calls for you to cut the 6x6 piece of paper into 3-inch squares and then use 2 of those 3-inch squares together, but you're going to overlap them. And so when I was creating this sketch, I thought, well, if I'm just going to overlap these two, you're only going to see like the teeny tiny corners of the back piece of paper. So why don't I die cut out of the center and get some more use out of that pattern paper? So I cut a circle out of each one, which is what I'm doing with the dies now. And I created an original sketch that incorporated one of those 1.5 by 2 inch cut aparts. However, because in this unique paper pad, I did not have as many cut aparts because some of them were sentiments only, I am going to change it up and do a new, different design. So this one will not be included in the PDF. This one that I'm taping together right now is. But the card that I do with the circles is going to be different than what is called for in the PDF. So I just want to call your attention to that so that you can change it up yourself if that works better for your pattern paper. One of the reasons that I did this is because the particular paper that I chose, when I cut the circle out and I flip it over to use the other side, it is these tools, which I think is cool. However, they are white. And so the white on white, it needs a mat on it. And I could still even add a mat and then do what is called for. But it also calls for you to use one of those 1.5 by 2 inch cut aparts on top of it. But I don't have enough of those. And so if I'm only going to be using this little sentiment with it, using the 2 circles stacked on top of each other with a teeny tiny sentiment in the middle just doesn't feel balanced. So in order to help things work a little bit better, I'm going to add mats to my circles, and I am going to balance it all out by using 3 circles instead of just 2. In general, things look better in sets of odd numbers. So if you're going to add embellishments on a card, like you're going to put some gems on the card, you should probably add 3 or 5 gems rather than just 2, because they allows you to create visual triangles and it just looks more pleasing to us. So that is why I made that switch. In the original sketch, because I have that big cut apart element or bigger cut apart element, it still feels more balanced. I got rid of that. So this is how I recreated the balance and I rebalanced the card. It worked out perfect because there's 3 of each sheet of paper. So when I cut out the circles, I cut 2 from each sheet of paper, which left me with, I can do math here, 2 times 3 is 6. So there's 6 pieces, 6 circles essentially. And then that means I can make 2 of this card with the 3 circles. So that's just giving you the heads up. This is my alternate sketch idea here. What I'm doing here is because I have layered this one circle over the other 2, I'm just taking a scrap of cardstock and propping it up, because otherwise it kind of like bumps down over that paper. And when it bumps down like that, it just looks a little less finished. Kind of propping it up works well. This last piece of pattern paper. And one of the reasons I decided to do this paper pad as my paper pad template is in part, and this is going to sound silly, because it doesn't work very well. Because this paper pad is not perfect for this template, I wanted to do another video where I shared how I would use my template and make some modifications. So I don't want you to think, well, just because a template that you see out there doesn't work perfectly for you doesn't mean that you can't use part of it or get some ideas from it and then kind of go from there. So I'm showing you like what I would do in that situation where things aren't working out perfectly. So now I have this last pattern paper that has the stripes on the back, and the stripes just did not seem to go with any of my other sketches. Now, actually, I could have just avoided the stripes on the back, and instead of using the strips with the sentiments and all the designs there, I could have just used the front side and combined it and used it with any of these other sketches, like particularly cutting template B would have been fine. However, the other side that doesn't have the strips across it, it's a little boring. it's kind of just this like splotchy pattern, kind of a watercolor pattern. It doesn't have a lot of interest to it. And so I thought it was a shame to waste the back that has these strips that are kind of interesting. So what I did was I came up with a very simple design that, again, is not part of the paper pad template, where I cut a 3-inch wide rectangle, and then I didn't plan what the length of it would be because I just based it off of the strip that I wanted. So on the back side, at the bottom of the paper, was this strip with all the bottles and a little like sort of checkered pattern. I had my 3x6 inch strip. I just cut off the bottles and the plaid or checkered pattern, whatever that is. And then I let my rectangle be whatever size was left. And I made that my very last card because that's what worked for this paper pad. And that's an example of how I would stay flexible for my paper. If you found this video inspiring, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.